Welcome to week 5 of Pentathon. I can't believe I missed the opportunity last week of saying the penultimate Pentathon thing, but I didn't. So we'll just have to go with yes. Here's the final week in Matt from Paperback Junkie's most flippin' easiest read along ever, which is basically just read stuff that he likes, which was pulp. Which was many pulp authors. You can see the list of them down below. I really enjoyed that because many of the pulp authors I enjoyed, or I went, hey, this is somebody I like Edgar Rice Burroughs or John Carroll Daly, who he didn't specifically actually mention while he was doing it. I fell into it, and then he actually ended up talking about it. So, I found some fun authors in that pulp vein, which I enjoy reading. However problematic they are, probably because of the problematic, because I just love digging into that kind of stuff. And then his final prompt was, read a comic book. Just read a single issue of a comic book. And it's like, I think Steve Donoghue, who's also doing, is like, I'm going to go out and buy a new comic book and read that, even though he's sounds like someone like myself who's sort of fallen out of reading. I think he reads collections, so he's actually still in the superhero game. I, on the other hand, haven't been in the superhero game for a long time. I still read comic books. I don't find anything childish about that. I'm actually in the midst of reading this one here, which is more, I think, far from DC and Marvel being the big people that I read now. It's Fantagraphics are probably one of the titans of that. That's the kind of dude I am. I'm into those indie, whatever all the words that basically mean it's not superheroes. Comics is what I not read. But 1982, the what is this? This is the 1982 August edition of the Fantastic Four, number 245, which I don't know if I held on to this. I had all my superhero comics that I collected at the time. I think I got rid of them all. But this is one I saw, and I think I just picked it up again because it was like $1. And it was like, I remember this. I remember really liking this. And yes, I picked this up originally at the time. This is 36 years ago. I was 13 years old. I was an aquajet, and my house was two bus rides away from the swimming pool. And so I take the bus downtown, get off the bus, and I have to do a transfer. However, I have maybe 5 minutes, if that. So I'd run into the corner store where, yes, there wasn't comic book stores. There were just these racks, the spinning racks, the mythical spinning racks of comics. And I would go through and I would find, and sometimes they would have the next issue. Sometimes they would skip, or if someone else would have bought them all, but whatever. But I read Marvel, I read Fantastic Four, I grabbed them all, I hopefully caught the bus, and then I read them basically on the way to swim practice. And Fantastic Four was definitely the one, and specifically the guy who was writing, inking, penciling this at the time, John Byrne, was the super big dude. And indeed, this is his era at the Fantastic Four was a big one. He had come from being a very big contributor to the X-Men in the Days of Future Past and the Dark Phoenix saga, which even if you're not a comic book reader, if you've been subjected to the X-Men movies, for good or for ill, you know these stories, because this is the time period that the movies have mined. And indeed, I'm biased because I'm an old dude who grew up during that and read them at the time. So obviously that's the best stuff. And I have no clue what happened afterwards, because pretty soon after this, I jumped off. But yes, so I remember really liking this issue. And this isn't a big earth-shattering issue. This is John Byrne, who was actually British-born, but from the age of 8 to I think 25 lived in Canada. So as a Canadian, I'm going to claim him as a Canadian, even though later on in life you find out. And I'm reading this now exactly maybe how conservative of a fellow he is, and how the internet, sometimes prickly conservative guys on the internet doesn't work out so well, and some of the people never come off at their best. However, this is a time when I just knew John Byrne as, wow, he's a great artist. He's I really enjoy his stuff. And I really enjoyed this issue of the Fantastic Four. So let's dive into it so I don't do a 20-minute video on a single issue comic book. However, I will say we're in August of 1982, the Equal Rights Amendment in the states, is going to help kind of equality for women and for minorities, was failed to get state ratification. That died in Canada. We have Pierre Trudeau, father to our now current Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, had patriated the Canadian Constitution, the Canada Act, with the Charter of Rights and Freedom, with its 34 rights. One of those being a notwithstanding clause, because we're Canadians. So, we're going to have all these rights. They're really important. Except, if we have issues, except notwithstanding, which is to me seems like a very Canadian thing. Like, you have rights, except maybe you don't. That seems to me there's something very Canadian in that, of like being very idealistic, except for reasons. And unfortunately, those reasons have, no one's ever going to use this. Yeah. Politicians of various stripes have used this to, depending on where you fall on the spectrum of the politics, you probably don't feel that happy. You may not feel that happy about it. I know I don't. But so yes, and why do I bring all this up? It's because we start off with Sue Richards, but we'll get into that, appearing on a television show, Woman to Woman, with a Barbara Walker, which is obviously a Barbara Walters knockoff, or a thing where basically this Barbara, she's a mean boss. The crew is like is too afraid of her to even interrupt the taping, because when they see the fantastic emergency flare coming from the Baxter building, she's a brittle feminist, and she starts off by saying, "Oh, Ms. Storm." It's like, no, I'm Mrs. Richards. I'm proud to bear my husband's name, and I know he's proud that I am proud, or whatever like that. And Sue goes on about how, like, this is my role. I'm happy to be a mother and a wife, and it's very kind of like, she's like, it's like, I'm little Susie, well, not little Susie Homemaker, but there's a very much kind of, there's Sue viewing herself as, I'm a mother, I'm a wife, and I can define myself as that, and that doesn't make me less, and I'm above all your labels, and Barbara takes her to task for being kind of the damsel in distress and all this, and Sue kind of shoots back with, well, we wouldn't have survived Dr. Doom, our evil arch nemesis, if it wasn't for me. And hey, I did knock out the Invisible Hulk once, which I think this is like, it's wonderful in the sense of, like, I think as a 13-year-old, was I aware of just sort of like all the kind of things of, this is the 80s feminism right here, where you have kind of this brittle feminist kind of challenging Sue, and Sue going, "Oh no, I'm proud to be a wife and a mother." Like, why would you say that's a wrong thing? And I think it kind of shows maybe Mr. Byrne's kind of conservative nature, and I think probably also just the conservative nature of this fantastic family, with a very patriarchal Richard Reed and whatever like that. So, also another thing I've got to really appreciate with this comic is that it starts out with giving you the origin story of the Fantastic Four, of them, being these ordinary people. I mean, I don't know why they keep on stressing they're ordinary people, but it's like Reed Richards, super genius. Johnny Storm, I think, was like a hotshot test pilot or something like that. Even Ben Grimm. Oh, Ben Grimm is the ex-pilot, and I don't know, maybe Johnny Storm at this point was just sort of a hotshot kind of ne'er-do-well who they for some reason brought along on a dangerous flight into space, where they were bombarded by cosmic rays and they got their powers, and it just demonstrates, elasticy, Mr. Fantastic Four, what does it call him? He calls him the monstrously tragic thing. He goes from being a human being to being this very kind of rock invulnerable but really powerful guy. And then Johnny Storm, who in contrast, he's got these amazing powers of flame. He's the Human Torch, but he can turn it off and be the man about town and hey gals, and be kind of dreamy and all that, which is there's some conflicts coming up with that. And so, basically this is one of these interviews where, she brings up, oh, did you have a love affair with Prince Namor, the Submariner? And, Sue, who's got this kind of, the scarf around her neck, which, in this kind of the helmet hair, I almost do see kind of a conservative kind of Phyllis Schaefer, who's kind of one of the major opponents of the Equal Rights Amendment. I can see a slight echo there. I might be projecting stuff. I had a lot of fun just sort of researching the time, because this is all stuff that I was completely unaware of, and I was just sucking this up. But and don't worry, I'm not going to go through every single page of this, but I just thought, wow, I really enjoyed the beginning of this book, because it really gave you a kind of a dip into the sense of these times without ever mentioning, the Equal Rights Amendment, or about just like, how are women nowadays. And like you have Barbara Walker's, who is obviously a professional woman, is kind of brittle and mean to her staff. And you've got Sue, who's like, I'm proud to be a wife and a mother. And yes, I've sometimes been a liability to my team, but I also contribute. I also do much. I'll do much stuff. And indeed, to Byrne's credit, this is the start of kind of Sue getting more powered up. And indeed, she switches from being Invisible Girl, in this era, to becoming Invisible Woman. So yeah, we have that. And it's interesting because this story is all about, she goes back, spoilers for this issue, by the way. She goes back to the Baxter building, and she finds that everybody's been knocked like unconscious and their minds are blank. And she comes upon the Human Torch being held by the throat by this blonde, blue-eyed kind of creature in tattered rags. And it's like, he's asking them, like, you have to tell me who am I? What's going on? You have to give me like some information. You're holding out some kind of secret to me. And he's holding him there, and he's very kind of, he gets very biblical, and he throws the Human Torch aside, just knocks him unconscious. And, he can see Sue even when she's invisible, as the Invisible Girl. There she is, invisible. That's a wonderful thing about comics is instead of just having a blank space, you get this kind of a ghostly silhouetted creature, which represents that she's invisible, and he can see her, and we as the viewer can see her, which is one of these good things with comic books. I have to say also, one of the things that Jim Byrne is also known for is he actually drew people. Like, a lot of comic books before and since then have a tendency to just draw everybody like they're naked, but kind of then draw clothing lines on them. He was super much the guy for drapery. And it's interesting, in the big scene, climactic scene of this, Sue pulls off her jacket and tosses it over him, and so you get all this drapery, and of course he magically turns it into almost this kind of a biblical thing. So there's all this drapery, and like even Sue herself, like her clothing is all drawn. Like you could see Jim Byrne, if he wasn't like a comics artist, he could totally be doing illustrations for like design of clothing. He was obviously somebody who was like he looked at that stuff and he reflected it in his art. Like these were the fashion designs at the time. I even like I was making fun of this little neckerchief. I can see like that of the time is one of these like little fashion details that I can see it being a very 80s thing. So we go through all this. She gets blown out of the building. She erects a force field because she's not only invisible, she can project force fields, which actually makes her quite the powerful creature. However, at the very end of the book, you find out, because she's gone into one room and she said, "Oh my God, like the robot that's supposed to take care of my son, who also might have powers, has exploded." And what's happened is that his powers have suddenly manifested, and he's become a man with all these powers, but he's still got the intellect of a child, and it sort of shut down his brain, and he couldn't remember who he was until there's this scene where they're confronted with each other, and she looks into his eyes and like, it's Franklin. And it comes back to him, and suddenly he's talking. I have to say, with Jim Byrne, like a lot of the dialogue things here say like, oh wow, he's talking he's got all this adult dialogue, but he's talking like a child, and it doesn't really come through in the dialogue. It definitely shows maybe a limitation in his thing. Is it doesn't it just basically sounds like kind of techno babble speech of that would come out of someone like Reed Richards. And indeed someone says, oh, he's talking like Reed Richards, but he's got like he's like a kid. So I don't know if it's just a verbal delivery of how you're supposed to read it, but it sounds like it sounds like a kid. However, he says, oh, we've got to kind of disperse his power. And so he says, oh, and and Franklin goes over to the Thing, who's at this point, the Thing is all kind of knobbly and kind of organic-y. I'm not quite sure what it's supposed to be, but it's a result. He's supposed to look all craggly and cracked and kind of rocky, but instead he's kind of more kind of grossly organic-y. It wasn't a really good look, and it wasn't like a signature thing. It probably had fans complaining about it, I'm sure, because fans love to complain about everything. But he says like, oh, I'll turn you back to human. I'll turn you back to human. That's what I can do for you, Uncle Ben. And he kind of reaches into his mind and he goes, oh, and he's like, he's a young child, and he's like, I don't understand this. So he turns to the patriarch of the family, Richard Reed's, Mr. Fantastic, and says like, what should I do? It's like, what can I do? And so ends up he turns him back into craggly Thing, classic Thing. And he says like, well, it's like Ben's like, well, hey, I thought you could turn me back to being human. And it's like what's the deal? It's like, oh, actually turned out he didn't have that power. And so the Thing goes off with his blind girlfriend who he loves, and they met as him as a monstrous creature. He met this blind woman, and this blind woman, she could see the beautiful soul within, and wasn't distracted by his monstrous visage on the outside. So they fell in love, and they're together. And as they walk away, it's like Sue's like, that's not really how it was. Like, he could have changed him back, couldn't he? He's like, and Richard's like, oh well, yes, Sue. But he looked into his mind and he saw that Ben, he felt that his blind girlfriend fell in love with him as the Thing, and he's afraid that if he stops being the Thing, that the blind girlfriend will stop loving him if he's not this big, monstrous, powerful creature. So he chose to stay the Thing, and this to me is like John Byrne. I have to say, like, regardless of where on his conservative and stuff like that, at the beginning you have this kind of a battle of kind of like, what is a woman? What is the role model of a woman? Is it a brittle feminist? Is it the capable homemaker mother? I'm proud to be most of all proud to be a mother, which is totally valid thing, but it's just like there's this opposition, and we're going to have a battle over this of kind of a conservative versus, oh, you're trying to disturb the natural order of the family. And at the end you've got the Thing, the male, and it's like he's afraid of losing his tough, rocky exterior, because maybe then the woman won't love him. It won't love him anymore. And it's like, isn't that like? It's like, well, okay, there's the two, there's the female at the beginning, and there's the male at the end, and I can see why. This is a book that I really enjoyed at the time, is just this one-off, like lovely kind of summation of the time of masculinity. Not maybe summation, but a nice snapshot of the time of here's masculinity, and here's femininity, and our constructs of both. And okay, so some part of me really responded to this as a 13-year-old boy. I was also totally into power fantasies and, women with unnaturally large body parts that weren't superpowered, other than, superpowered for adolescent boys. But this kind of... It's called Childhood End, and I'm not going to say that comic books or superhero comic books are a childish thing, because I think they bring a lot. They're just something that this was a childhood end for me. This was a transition point for me where I got out of comics. I got out of comics altogether, and got into reading more. Part of that was just economics. Oh my God, 60 cents for each issue. That's a lot. I could buy a couple of I could buy a whole big science fiction novel and read that, which is what I ended up starting to do is more and more. And then comics just faded away. And I was reading science fiction, and then I was reading literature, more literary work or whatever, stuff like that through my kind of university and kind of that stage of my life. And now there's a mix of much. I've never come back to superhero comics. As I said, I read kind of more, properly, I guess what I would call graphic novels, not corporate, I guess, in a way as well. Just, individual creators who are going to do one-off works that are one whole contained thing, because I think there's something about the Fantastic Four 243, which is, it's a lovely thing. Like Byrne is obviously somebody who's referencing all the continuity of the Fantastic Four, but he's also telling just a single story in a single issue and giving me a full experience, which I really enjoyed. Yeah, it was just, I'm really surprised exactly how meaty this was for me as something to go back to and enjoy. Am I going to pick up the rest of the Fantastic Four run? Am I going to read through them all? No. But I enjoyed this. So yes, thank you, Matt. I've managed to do 20 minutes on a single comic book issue, but I'm blabbing about myself and blabbing about all the stuff. I'm eager to go. I think Steve Donoghue has done a one, which is his comic book, but also a thing on Comicgate, which is, it's the continuation of the unfortunately reflection of the general battle that happens in our society, which is maybe not a bad thing. Let's put aside all the ugliness and say we're a live culture where people disagree and there's people battle stuff. There's some stuff that I think is just, we're just letting off lots of negative energy into the world and not really doing ourselves any good. But hopefully we're working through shit. And I think there's something about pulp that I'm going to go back to my recurring theme of why I enjoy pulp, with all its problematic and nasty kind of things, as well as all its fun and adventurous and positive things, is like it's working through stuff. And I really enjoy that about pulp. And it's in a more primal, less considered way than literature. And sometimes a much more up to the minute. Someone talked about, like, if you want to get a pulse on culture, turn on the TV, and not to watch the shows, watch the advertisements. The advertisements are up to the minute. These are advertisers who have to basically gauge everything to make their product sell. So they have to know how our attitudes at that very moment are. And there's something about pulp actually that I think is the same thing. So yes, that's my praise of pulp. So thank you, Matt. Thank you for the readathon. I'm going to finish up Shake Tubeathon, and then I'm just going to go read my own stuff, because that'll be fun. Not that this hasn't been. It's just like, I'm not a structured guy. Stop structuring me, you BookTube. Screw off. More videos later.